good day. Thanks for coming in.
Hi. Thanks for coming in. We're happy to have you.
We're live. It's always exciting when you go live, but welcome to the Autoscope podcast, Conversations with Nerces Mavelian. And we're excited to be back. Our first series of podcasts we feel went pretty well, and we're learning as we go here. So we certainly appreciate you watching us, and we hope that we're bringing you some content that that
You can benefit from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and also be aware that tickets are available. We got a full house out there right now, and we do have
And the
room.
crowd's going wild. Yeah.
So just let us know ahead of time. Nurses, today I wanted to, the models that you have, that you take care of, the brands, of course, BMW, Mercedes, Porsche, all the high-end European. Of course, it's European Car Care.
Right.
But each has its distinct type of customers, and the brands have their distinct needs. And I'd like, if it's okay with you today, to talk a little bit about Mercedes Benz.
Sure.
And what your Mercedes Benz customers might not be aware of, or to be, to educate them a little bit, to help them with the repair and maintenance of their cars, and bringing them in here to the shop.
Well, I've got just a guy for that. We'll see if we can get Bryan in here. Yeah, as a matter of fact, he's walking over. Yeah, let's bring him in.
Okay, Mr. Mercedes Benz.
He was just working on the SL 550. Yeah, Bryan.
Yeah, I wonder what he was doing with that. SL 550. That.
Yeah, well, he's always.
And that's a convertible, right?
Yeah, the SLs. Yeah, the SL.
Yeah, well, that one with the. I heard they don't make the clamshell anymore. Now they're only rag tops.
Well,
We'll have to ask Bryan about that. All right, well, here's Bryan. We got to make some adjustments. Of course, he's the shortest guy in the shop. the big guy here. And as our production crew, the many assets of this begin to work to get you set up properly with us, that we're all in the shot and all of that. Nerces and I were just talking about Mercedes Benz customers, and you guys have a lot of them. Of course, it's one of the top brands, and I know you've been here a long time. You've actually worked on my cars years ago. I don't know how many years ago that was, and you've always provided just wonderful advice to me in talking about my cars and the care of them. And Mercedes Benz are kind of unique with some of the things that they have, and so Nerces wanted to bring you in here. And he had some questions for you, and let you kind of help us through this.
Absolutely.
yeah, we were just wondering what the customer should know about their Mercedes-Benz, because a lot of times we want them to understand what to look for, so that they are prepared to maintain their property, so it doesn't give them much more of an expense to deal with later on. That's why we called you over, to see if you can help us educate some of the customers' needs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What are some of the things that they need to know?
Some of the big problems that we really see with those is actually engine mounts failing. Most customers don't really realize that the engine mounts fail because it's something that just kind of happens gradually over time. Right. Basically what happens is when you crank your vehicle up and you pull the car down into gear, you'll feel a vibration in the steering wheel. What that's caused by is actually the engine mounts are completely collapsed. It's a rubber mount, so you've got basically a metal arm sitting right on top of a rubber mount, and it's just going to vibrate like crazy.
So to kind of explain what a motor mount does is it isolates the vibrations and noise from the engine to transfer into the engine, into the chassis.
Absolutely.
And to your steering wheel and in your seat. So as you're saying, as the motor mounts sag, the rubber sags, and some of them have liquid, I think.
Most of them are hydraulic.
Hydraulic now. Yeah. They sag, and that so your vibration kind of carries through.
Yep.
And you're saying that I'm I feel gradually because I'm getting used to the vibration, so I don't really.
You don't really notice it as
Notice
much.
it, yeah.
So you'll just be driving the car along, you won't pay any attention to it,
Right.
and then you bring it into us, and we mention the engine mounts and mention what the actual symptoms are,
Right.
and you'll be like, a light bulb went off. It's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I have been noticing that my car has been, feels like it rides rougher.
Yeah.
Um,
And then when you replace them,
and people are like, wow, it's like I have a brand new car.
yeah, is the engine running?
Yeah.
That kind of yeah, we get that too. It's like, what
Also,
happened?
is there a difference between how a customer drives their car that can affect the wear of
Absolutely.
a motor mount?
Engine mounts, depending on how you drive the car, an engine mount should last somewhere between 80 and 100,000 miles. If you drive the car hard, if you're doing a lot of like jackrabbit starts where you're just kind of stomping on the accelerator away from a red light, or also if you're stomping on the brake pedal coming up to a red light, it can actually put a lot of extra stress on those engine mounts and can cause the engine mounts to fail a lot more quickly.
Yeah. And the liquid filled ones that you said, are there telltale signs of?
Yeah, there is. There's a like an oil inside. It's like a hydraulic oil that they use inside of the engine mounts, and that once the rubber starts to tear to a point, it'll actually start to leak out that oil, and so you'll have the evidence of the. That
So if there's signs of that leaking before the mount is completely collapsed, we would recommend them replace it then.
Definitely.
Before they
before
start
it becomes a
feeling-
problem.
Yeah. All right. So
A big problem with having the engine mounts, driving around with the engine mounts collapsed, is it can actually throw the drive line out of the correct angle and throw your pinion angles and everything off,
Right.
which can do a lot of damage to the drive line.
because it puts it on.
Yeah, because it puts it at an odd angle.
Yeah.
Basically, the drive shafts are designed to sit pretty much level all the time.
Right.
And Mercedes usually uses a rubber, what they call a flex disc or a gibo on either end of the drive shaft to absorb the vibration or absorb any kind of off angles.
Right.
Well, that rubber, like any other rubber, is going to get harder over time, and if it's at an odd angle, it can actually cause it to tear and fail.
Sure.
So-
yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
So
Well,
does
good
it
to
take
know.
much for the motor mounts to make that effect? I mean,
It really doesn't. I mean, you got to figure the motor mounts, when they do fully collapse, they've only dropped 10 to 12 millimeters, so less than half an inch.
Yeah.
So just that little bit of difference can make a 4 or 5 degree angle and difference in the drive shaft.
so
Yeah.
they compact down, which increases it, or it's not. Does it mean the car will ride harder?
Absolutely.
Or,
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then so
you'd
that
feel-
more.
It'll
after
feel a
that-
lot more harsh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can they feel it then, even like when they start up the car and the engine torques a little bit, or something?
A lot of times you can. Certain chassis are a lot more susceptible to feeling it as you're starting the engine than others, like the C-Class chassis, your 204s, the C-Class, the GLKs, GLCs. They're really common, like when you're cranking the engine over, you can actually feel the engine just thump, 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 thump as it's turning over because it's just hitting so hard. The higher end chassis, you don't feel it as much when you're just cranking the car, but once you get the car cranked, especially when you pull it down into gear, it's very noticeable.
So what models of Mercedes-Benz should you be most aware of? I mean, you wouldn't
Really
see that
any
so
of
much in a 4-cylinder, even.
Any of them really, because like say you're talking about driveline angles, and those things are made to be within 1 or 2 degrees of a certain angle, and with those engine mounts being collapsed, like I say, it can throw it off as much as 5 degrees. So.
Well, I guess my question is that thinking the more larger horsepower cars, the big V8s, the big heavy motor.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the manufacturer probably bolsters those engine mounts for those
They do.
vehicles
Yeah.
as well.
Well, some manufacturers, I know we're talking about Mercedes, but some manufacturers have actually gone to a electronic motor mount to where,
An electronic or vacuum assisted engine.
yeah, vacuum assisted, or what happens is when you gun it, it actually stiffens it up so it doesn't have that tube flexibility, and it keeps that power to the drivetrain more. Either way, they are going to wear out, and so don't be surprised if your mechanic says you've got a motor mount, and you're like, what's a motor mount? Well, the motor mount basically isolates the engine vibration from the rest of the chassis, and holds it up so you don't really feel it. So if you start feeling a little bit of vibration, and it's not a misfire, you don't have a check engine light, but the engine feels rough, most likely that's your motor mount's collapsed, and it doesn't have enough cushion. So basically your pillow is flattened, if you will, and you feel all the vibrations. Once you puff it up again, then it's nice and soft and you don't get the vibration through.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't even really think about a motor mount that much. 'Cause
Right.
They think
They
of
really
the
don't.
suspension is what smooths out the ride and everything.
Right.
But so the motor mounts, this isn't just entirely indicative of Mercedes Benz.
No, this
It's
is
all
something that's
vehicles,
across
but,
all vehicles, really.
but are you seeing a lot more in Mercedes Benz than others?
Yes and no. Some other vehicles that we see them pretty common in is like the Audis and the Porsches. They're pretty common to fail on those cars as well, and they're hydraulic filled, so we'll see the hydraulic oil actually leaking out of them and getting all over the subframe below them.
Right.
It's pretty common to see.
Usually either reddish or black substance that comes out of it. It's pretty noticeable.
Do they have a noticeable smell of that fluid?
And the driver, the customer's not really going to notice it because there's a belly pan, so everything gets caught onto it.
Majority of the time,
It's not gallons of fluid. You're talking about maybe 6 ounces of fluid.
And that's just enough to affect it.
Yeah, well, it's actually taking the fluid out, so it's actually
so
lowering.
you're losing that dampening effect from the hydraulic fluid.
It's a very, very important thing to have when you want smooth ride and your high luxury car that you've purchased. The performance is not there when it collapses. The feeling that you have this, oh my God, what's going on here? You should never feel, or you should feel very little idling of your car. When your motor mounts are collapsed, you will definitely feel a vibration in there. When you put new mounts on, you're like, wow, is my engine running?
Noticeable
Yeah,
difference.
you should, and a lot of them do, especially when they're collapsing, they get replaced. They go, oh my God, I can't even hear or feel the engine running.
Yeah. Well, kind of like what we're talking about, the cushioning and all that, the same thing is like we refer to the suspension as well. And a lot of Mercedes Benz have the air suspension set up that. So what are some current concerns there or some things to be aware of for a Mercedes Benz owner?
Yeah, Bryan could probably explain that a little better. Of course, the air suspension is wonderful combination of nice ride to performance, but they do come with some issues. And what are some of those issues?
The biggest issues we see with them is actually the air spring failing.
Now, the air spring is basically a big airbag, right?
Basically, what it
a
is.
rubber
Yeah.
airbag.
Most people will notice it. Like they'll walk out to their car in the morning to go get in their car and they'll notice that the car is sitting really low, or they'll crank their car up and they'll get that message, please wait, vehicle rising, or they'll get an airmatic suspension fault. Mercedes Benz is called airmatic.
Right.
And basically you just crank the car up, you let the car pump back up, and then you can take and drive your car down the road. The problem is when that's occurring, that means that there's something leaking in the system.
Right.
It's definitely best to get it in sooner rather than later because the longer you wait, the more wear you're putting on your air suspension compressor, which is a very expensive component.
Right.
The more likely you are to actually damage. There's what they call a valve block that controls the level of each of the four corners of the vehicle, and more likely you are because that valve block's having to work a lot harder, and it's usually made of a plastic housing. So you're likely to damage that.
And if you have a line that's leaking just enough air where the airbags are coming down and resting on the bag itself, you want to take time for it to inflate. Don't drive it because the rubber is going to run into each other and crease it and ruin the airbag.
And most of those air
prematurely.
springs have a solid core that goes around them. And if you try and drive them with them completely collapsed, it can actually that solid core can just cut right through that.
Tear the airbag and it's useless.
Yeah.
So don't drive without it inflating and come in as quickly as possible because it can be something small that's leaking, and but if you drive with the airbag down, you're probably going to have to buy a new airbag, which is a couple of $1,000 easy.
So as a customer, are they feeling that's riding rough, or what indication do that they have they need to have their suspension?
And like I say, they have the light that comes on the dash that'll warn you that the suspension is too low, and that the vehicle needs to raise up before you can drive it. And you also, if you don't get that message, the vehicle will actually be sitting basically on the bump stops for the suspension, so there's no suspension movement at all. So you're basically just, riding like riding in an old buggy.
Go-kart.
Yeah. because there's no suspension, there's no movement in the suspension.
Believe me, you'll know. Yeah, it'll be
It's
bouncing
really
everywhere.
obvious. Yeah.
Well, that's good for this podcast, Autoscope podcast, Conversations with Nerces Mavelian. And it was exciting to have Bryan come on board, talk about suspension motor mounts. We call him our smooth operator to make sure that your car is driving smooth, no vibrations, and just kind of rolling along. So thanks for coming in. And we definitely got to bring you in a few more times because I'm sure there's other things we need to talk about as well as time allows.
Yeah. All right.
So thank you for
Thanks,
watching.
Bryan.
Yep,
Thanks
no
for being a part of the podcast. We appreciate it. And remember, tickets are available online, and we got a few available out there to join in and watch the characters of Autoscope.
And remember to give us a like, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yes,
Okay.
yes. Please like us.
Yeah.
We want to be liked.
Hey y'all, Stephen Bethard here. I've been a Autoscope customer for 3 years. Excellent service, car is always taken care of. They're quick, friendly, can always fit you in if you get into a pinch. Highly recommend, they're fantastic.